Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
Legalize it.
So how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, "Great, Barry, a reefer."
Welcome back, everybody, to the Karma Koala podcast. On this week's show, I've got Ronald McNutt, and I'm just going to read out his biography that I found at Purdue University website to give us a little bit of a context. It says Ronald studied religion at Tufts University in the mid-late 1970s after taking a psychology course on altered states of consciousness that included well-known speakers such as Walter Huston Clark, and Roland Fisher, amongst others. Nutt organized the Tufts Altered State of Consciousness Organization, a student group which hosted lectures by prominent speakers in the field of consciousness. Went on to study law at University of Georgia, where he became the executive research editor of the Georgia Law Review and wrote a research paper on the First Amendment protection for psychedelics. He's practiced as an attorney based in Nashville for 40 years with a focus on civil rights litigation and workers' compensation cases. His appreciation for plant medicine and mysticism remained ardent during the entirety of his adult life, with a particular interest in indigenous traditions. He's an actor in the Nashville Psychedelic Society and a discussion leader and journalist in other psychedelic community spaces. Ronald, welcome to the show. My voice is beginning to work, so that's better. If I just keep talking, if I stop, that's the dangerous thing. I just wanted to read that out. Learn about how, and that obviously gives a précis, but how you got involved with psychedelics during that period and how it informed you as a lawyer as well as a person, I suppose, because I'm really interested in these conversations I have with people in psychedelics to find out whether in the end you're not really a psychedelics lawyer, but have started to create the idea of law with a psychedelics viewpoint, I suppose. And it changes the way people think about things, and my conversations tend to end up in that way: is, oh yeah, you've done this case, you've done that case, but actually the reality of it is, as it is with psychedelics, far more nuanced and complicated.
So what happened to me was I was not really thinking I would go into law. I happened to grow up in Massachusetts. I grew up in Newton, Massachusetts, where I didn't know it at the time, but Timothy Leary was holding his sessions there with people like Ram Dass and Houston Smith and any number of people. And then when I went to college, I had become interested in cannabis, and then I had opportunities to try psychedelics. I think people were making it locally, like at MIT and places like and Harvard.
Yeah, well, I mean, all universities in the United Kingdom were the same in the 1980s.
Really? Well, yeah.
Yeah, the science labs were always very busy.
And so I felt that I was connected with nature in really exciting ways. And then I wanted to travel. I had a girlfriend in Austin, and I went down there for a summer, and I was able to enjoy psilocybin mushrooms. And so I had a life-changing experience. I felt like I was in the presence of a non-dual God. And having been essentially non-religious before that, it changed my life. And I felt that I wanted to dedicate my efforts to being a positive influence in some way. And so I ended up majoring in religion. I went on a program in Paris, and I met my wife there, and worked in a mental hospital for a couple of years. I remember when we went on a trip at the end of my study abroad, and there was a guy who was just recently graduated from law school, and he teased me and said that law school and acid don't mix. well, I decided to do an experiment with that,
and see
and
whether they did. Yes, well, I think that
so I ended up
that's the
doing
interesting thing
well
is,
enough.
yeah, you were doing that, in the 1970s. People make a decision maybe to do that in this day and age, but in the 1970s, I presume, I mean, plenty of people, I'm sure, were enjoying themselves, but making that decision together is really interesting because it must inform me from the moment you walk in the lecture theatre the first time how you're going to think about it.
Yeah, so I was interested in trying to do something beneficial for other people, and I decided, with the benefit of hindsight, that I had ancestral trauma, and that I what had some sense of shame and guilt because my ancestors exploited and enslaved people, and uh, they would have money that was derived from domination systems, like sharecropping and things like that. And so I ended up wanting to do constitutional law, and I had some really good judicial clerkships with federal judges. And so I worked in a small African American firm for about 10 years. And I was doing, police misconduct cases and prison, uh, uh, cruel and unusual punishment, safety cases, and jail cases, and First Amendment cases. And we did
And
that.
in that process, did it teach you to be more compassionate? Because some of those clients, let's be honest, aren't, aren't going to be easy. So I presume, what, how did the psychedelics inform the way that you practice that sort of level, bottom end of the court system, daily trudge?
Well, I can remember, uh, the contrast. On one hand, I wanted to be a kind and generous person, and on the other hand, I wanted to be powerful and popular and successful, and so there was a lot of tension with that, and I'm a social person, and law is antagonistic, and it's oppositional, and people want you to fail, and so I did feel empathic, but I was in one of those fight or flight states quite often, and it was hard to reckon with the fact that it was so uncomfortable. And ultimately, I ended up going into work that was a little bit more secure, and that's how I ended up in workers' compensation, working for the state. But I had to, this was during the Reagan era, and there was a lot of anti-psychedelic and cannabis
I think that might be an
activity.
understatement. A lot of, I mean, it was
Yeah,
pervasive, wasn't it, for a while?
it was really intense, and so I was totally underground, and it was really exhilarating when I started seeing more protection for psychedelic experience. There was a real disappointment in the mid 90s with the Smith case, Gonzalez. I'm not Gonzalez. It was the Oregon case that the Supreme Court basically walked away from any type of protection for psychedelics and religious experience. And so when the Psychedelic Bar Association started uh, getting traction, and
So
people were
and
going
when did
to,
remind me when the Psychedelic Bar Association sort of started? And were you in there at the very beginning? How did it coalesce?
well, there were several founding members, and I guess gotten some information about it from, I think it was incubated to some extent from MAPS and
Hmm.
Ismail Ali. And so I was one of the early members of it. And I think it was around 2021,
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I
2022.
just couldn't quite remember.
And I have all these wonderful books about psychedelics, and I've been uh, I've had a relationship with psychedelics for 50 years, and I've also done a lot of reading about it, and so I started taking the opportunity to, want to contribute some research. And it was just a wonderful opportunity to sort of like be rehabilitating, like the Soviets would rehabilitate people who had gotten alienated. Uh, but I also like I have a big ego because I'm a lawyer, and I would notice that some people who were new to psychedelics would claim more authority than I would feel comfortable claiming
Well,
myself.
that's the thing that's one of the things I've noticed over the. I just sit here tip tapping away, but there's a lot of people who have explosive experiences, and it's not helping their ego in any way or form, and they seem to be expert on everything for the next 18 months. And yes, I remember that when I was young, but sometimes I find it's a bit dangerous when very wealthy people in their mid 50s have the same experience, and then shove it down the rest of our throats. It's getting that balance, isn't it?
Well, I try not to be too judgmental of other people. And I do think that humility is extremely important. Gratitude and humility are important tools. And I've I've somehow impressed some people as being arrogant in the past. And so whatever humility I have at this point in my life is, I think it's very well earned. I have a keen awareness of the limits of my own capability, and an awe, overwhelming appreciation for the power of nature and the beauty of other people. So um, it's all fine and great. As I'm retiring from law practice, I transitioned into doing chaplain work at the Veterans Affairs. So it's an opportunity for me who got to avoid serving in Vietnam because the draft had ended when I was finishing high school. But these are men who were drawn into an extremely uncomfortable situation, and I feel that the empathy and the love that I've developed is helpful for me in providing reasonable companionship in challenging times for them.
So for you, personally, obviously working really close, psychedelics has taught you to work really closely with people, and in a sort of a caring environment. What about the other side of things with the law and having to work out where psychedelics is going in terms of writing down words on pieces of paper? And do you think the small amount of progress is positive at the moment, or are you how do you feel about it? What what's changing, and are we going to get common sense, or are we going to get a repeat of the cannabis world where there seems to be a lot of money first? We'll see what happens afterwards.
Yeah, well, that's one advantage that I have. I've got a state pension and Social Security, and I'm really losing my taste for trial work, which is what I used to do. And I'm not really that qualified, I think, as a transactional attorney. And I love to help incubate the space. I'm amazed that anybody is interested in hearing what I have to say. I've been able to speak about mushrooms in various settings and psychedelics. I think what's happening now is a very, very exciting initiative with supported adult use in Colorado and Oregon. Decriminalization has really taken hold. There are many victories within the expanded Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Several ayahuasca churches have gotten protection. There's some vigorous and very capable attorneys in this field who are advocates. Um, and there are conscientious practitioners who develop best practices and are
Well,
um,
those are the ones
helping.
I'm most interested in. As you say, to develop best practices to carry across the rest of the law.
Right. Yeah, I'm a great fan of the Sacred Plant Alliance. Uh, Allison Hoots is doing a lot of work with that. She's a wonderful attorney. Sean McAllister has
Yeah.
done a great job of representing a large number of ayahuasca churches. John Rapp is doing tremendous work. Martha Hartney and others in the Psychedelic Bar Association are they have stellar character. I have a great deal of respect for them. Gilbert Carrasco had a great success with the Church of the Eagle and Condor and the Church of the Celestial Heart case in California. That was a great success. And the Church of Gaia. Um, I'm seeing a lot. My intuition tells me that there's a lot of resistance by the federal government
But yet again, but the
for,
states are actually, if we can stay not relaxed about it, the states seem to be okay. Let's just do this in a grown-up, quiet, relaxed fashion. Not all the states, but the states you'd expect seems to be how it's playing out at the moment. Because I was about to ask you about Washington. I mean, it's it seems it's a bit like the cannabis executive order for rescheduling. It just seems all a bit of a, in my head, it all seems a bit of a scam. And it only happens if the boss says it happens, because that's the way things work there at the moment. So, it, and that's why I find it interesting, because the states actually are being, it's almost making them more confident in their own decisions with regard to psychedelics.
yeah, it's really, it's kind of like nonsense on stilts that you would have all these states that decriminalize something that's a Schedule One substance. I'm talking about cannabis. Cannabis is everywhere, and it's
And,
still
and
Schedule
has been
One
for a long
controlled
time.
substance.
Yeah, yeah, I know. Yeah,
That's crazy.
yeah.
And then, I mean, the whole idea that something that grows naturally is illegal. That doesn't make sense. And Dennis McKenna wrote a wonderful piece on that in the Handbook of Medical Hallucinogens. And I just think that the decrim nature movement, what Larry Norris is doing, and getting some local governments to uh, remove the prohibitions and make low priorities. The federal government can't enforce local laws if local laws uh, they have the the ability to make people uncomfortable, particularly psychotherapists, whose licenses might be on the line. Uh, I was hopeful that there was this initiative in the Right to Try Act. Dr. Sunil Agarwal and the Ames Institute challenged the unavailability of psilocybin to treat people at end of life
That was
because
that's the Washington courts. Yep.
yeah, it's in federal court. It
He's
was
in
in
the
the Ninth
federal court.
Circuit.
Okay.
Yeah, he's in Seattle, and so there was the argument was, well, as long as it's a Schedule One substance, psilocybin, you can't uh, prescribe it at all. Even to people who are under palliative care and are about to die and maybe of a terminal disease in about 3 months, which is really an appropriate use of psilocybin. But I don't know if that's going to happen. If they move it to Schedule Two, it might be a couple of years, but it would certainly be a boon for people, at end of life. And the veterans, I'm not involved in this at all, but the Veterans Affairs Department is advocating for wider access to psilocybin and MDMA. But there's a recent sort of step back from it. Apparently, there was some movement to expand access, but there's some tepid response. Apparently, one of the advocates was involved in an affair with Kirsten Sinema, and there's some bad
Oh,
taste about
yes, I
that.
think I vaguely saw
Did you
something
see
like
that
that.
article? Yeah, I think it
Yes,
was.
yeah, I did.
By the way,
But
I want to really compliment you on the access to articles that your uh, emails provide. It's really helpful.
Well, yeah, I've been doing it every day for 10 years, 7 days a week. So I just,
Really?
yeah, and I've always approached it as a global thing because most of the media in the US do it, and just the US, but I can't understand unless it's holistic. So yeah, this is why the psychedelics is still interesting in the US because the existing political paradigm, shall we call it, but psychedelics is still in discussion in the US more really than anywhere else. I mean, Australia's got a sort of smaller discussion, New Zealand, but it's really where still within the politics of Washington, you seem you see a lot of I'm seeing a lot more information about psychedelics and law and how to process your rights with psychedelics under US law. Um, and that seems to be growing quite quickly. I mean, have you noticed that change over the last sort of 24 months?
You're talking about what, are you talking about clinical and therapeutic, or are you talking about the religious
Well,
use or
yeah,
decriminalization?
yeah, it's sort of combination of all, basically.
Yeah, well, Massachusetts defeated a referendum, and I think that the medical and the academic fields are more cautious, perhaps. The pharmaceutical industry is kind of oppositional, I think. I think that was what defeated, the efforts to get MDMA removed from Schedule One. Massachusetts's referendum wasn't successful. I think it was too broad, and there were some improprieties, misrepresentations by
Yes, there
one of the
were. That's right. I
leaders.
remember that now. Now you
But
say
but
it.
Utah and New Mexico, I think they just came in with these legislative initiatives for um, organic psilocybin for by prescription. And that's really significant,
Yeah,
I
that's what I
think.
was thinking.
But my personal interest, Robert Jesse talked about, psychedelics for the betterment of well people. And I've been interested in psychedelics as part of spiritual growth. And the difficulty that we have is with the Judeo-Christian model of religion. People want to meet something that's a high standard, and that's valuable, such as the Native American Church of North America, which has really been heroic in establishing rights to sacramental experience with peyote. Um, but the model that seems most appropriate to me for the United States is a retreat model, like the ones ne not necessarily in the same pattern that you find in Peru and Costa Rica. But it seems to make sense that people would have an opportunity to have religious experience, even if they've never had psychedelics before. And to have this presented in the context of, multiple faiths, multiple traditions, kind of like the pilgrimage, the sacred pilgrimage, or the sacred retreat. Uh, but so far, the courts are really uncomfortable with psychedelics. I just think that the Justice Department got overwhelmed by well-funded initiatives, and most retreats don't have those resources. But right now, it might be a good time to press because even on the far right, there's some interest in advocating for elite special forces and victims of trauma in the military. And of course, there are a lot of victims of sexual trauma um, who can benefit from psychedelics in an appropriate setting. I'm just concerned about trying to medicalize it and getting the insurance involved. I think it should be an aspect of opportunities to engage with psychedelics. I just don't think it should be the exclusive one. And I'm concerned that there are people who want to
Well, I
medicalize
mean, yeah,
this.
and also you can't really place it in a box. I mean, that just by its very nature. Yeah, I've listened to you talk, and of course, for me, I want to go to a concert and use my psilocybin, or because for me, that's the same as going to a church. So that would be defined as adult use. Do you think there's a chance in hell of that happening in, say, the next decade?
Well, I'm a strong advocate of celebratory experience with psychedelics. You know, something like San Pedro is you're going to be energetic and engaged with it for 10 hours. It's unrealistic to think that you're going to be lying down the whole time.
Yeah.
No, I certainly enjoyed, some Grateful Dead shows. I was straight for some of them, and I wasn't straight
Some of
for
the others,
all of
yeah.
them. But I think that the decriminalized nature initiatives are very useful, and there's a lot of hope in that. And I think that providing appropriate integration services is very helpful. But what happened was when Schedule One came, the McKenna brothers came out with this book. I think it was in 1975, the Psilocybin Grower's Guide. And so a lot of people started using the technology to grow psilocybin because for whatever reason, they used to be in cow pastures, and then I don't know
Well,
whether it's
that's where I
fungicides.
spent my late teenage years, trumping around English hillsides, knowing
Oh,
exactly. Yes, so yes,
are they still growing? Because it seems like you can't find them as well as unless there's like an
not as
organic
much as
farm.
before, but they still grow.
They still grow.
I mean, I
Yeah,
remember once walking across Hyde Park in the middle of London, and ending up with a entire grocery shopping bag of goodies to go home with. So
oh, wonderful.
that was some time
Well,
ago, I'm sure. So they probably spray that area now or something. But yep, that's what I remember. You go and pick first, and then it's not a exchanging money for something in a plastic bag.
but I think that what happened was as people learned how to grow mushrooms, there was more goodwill established because people saw that if you're careful enough, as Terence McKenna said, if you're capable of growing mushrooms, you're probably not too sketchy a person. And as
Well,
people
look, we
who
haven't got long to go.
cared enough to grow.
This is another thing that I wanted to ask because there's a lot of talk now as psychedelics becomes more formalized within society, but and it's all talking a lot of talk about regulations and rules and laws. But looking my reading, and I'm reading from the outside, and my part experience in the culture in countries outside the US is the psychedelic space has always been very well self-regulated. People don't really like poisoning other people, and I mean, it has happened in from time to time, but it doesn't seem an area that if people work in it, they want to do bad things to other people. And therefore, sometimes I feel that the self-regulation of the existing setup, whatever it is, because it's so fluid, is almost better than what politicians might give us.
Well, I really admire your optimism, but there have been some significant liability judgments that have come down, and there have been some people who exploited other people in vulnerable positions. So um, that's concerning, because when you're in a hyper suggestible state and you're placing yourself in a vulnerable position with someone who has a lot of power over you. There have been instances of misconduct, either people unintentionally programming you to think that there's some sort of entity inside you, or using their hands to have physical contact with you in a way that's inappropriate. The thing that I like about the American judicial model, as tainted as it is is that there are opportunities for redress. And it's also, if you go into Peru in a distant retreat center, and something awful happens,
Something
you're
awful
probably
happens.
not good.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to sue somebody. And people tend to think, well, you should have known better than that. So hopefully people will develop best practices and learn discernment and find the right people to work with.
Ronald, well, we're almost out of time. Thank you very much for being
Well, thank you so
on
much,
the Karma
Sean.
Koala
It's a
podcast.
pleasure.
Sorry about my voice.
Oh, I love it. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk with you. It's been a pleasure.
Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
Legalize the earth. So how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, great, Barry, a reefer.